Well, I want to welcome everyone to this program featuring author and intuitive Frank DeMarco. I'll tell you a little bit about how I met Frank. It was last March, I think, at the Monroe Institute's leadership conference. And there was a silent auction, and Frank was kind enough to purchase my book, Your Psychic Soul, and to give me his book, Babe in the Woods, in return, which I subsequently read with tremendous interest and great enjoyment. It's one of his 3 novels. But the thing that really struck me about Frank during that particular time frame, which lasted for 3 or 4 days, was that I was running around doing mind mirror sessions for people and giving PowerPoint presentations and quite getting pretty exhausted, staying up late, getting up early. And I guess about the 4th day, I was rushing through the kitchen, just about to rush through the kitchen to the downstairs to do a study for Felice Dubois and Fred Reibel, who is a board member. Felice, you know, is a mind mirror practitioner. And really, I was kind of at the end of my rope. I'd been measuring people all day long. And Frank just, he says, "Judith," and I said, "Yes." And he says, "I know that you're very busy, but if you can spare 2 minutes, I can make all the difference for you." And I started to say, "No, I don't even have 2 minutes." But he had such an earnest and sincere and promising look in his eyes that I said, "Okay." He says, "All right, so just take a deep breath and relax." And he placed his hands on my shoulders. And to my utter astonishment, a sense of great peace and calm, and more important than anything, coherence streamed into my body and brain. And by the end of those 2 minutes, I was just a completely different person, and was able to do the, kind of complicated 2 mind mirrors, multiple hookups with Fred and Felice for about an hour, hour and a half, and went to bed and had wonderful dreams that night. And so it was with great interest that I, as you can imagine, that I read Frank's first book, or one of his books, Babe in the Woods. And I was just really amazed. For one thing, he's an incredibly gifted writer. As you may or may not know by now, he is the writer of many books, and I'll just share my screen with you and show you. So I read Babe in the Woods right here, and it was a novel, about someone who attends a program at the not very well obscured C.T. Merriman Institute, which is basically a version of the Monroe Institute. And it was such a great mix of terrific writing and great storytelling, superb plot, and most importantly for all of us, consciousness development. Someone waking up to things they didn't understand before and experiencing changes, palpable, tangible changes in their levels of awareness. And indeed, you can say that that is the story with all of Frank's books. Messenger, another novel, excellent, excellent novel. It's a follow-up to the story of Shangri-La. And I just finished Dark Fire, really superb. So these are the 3 novels. And the rest of them are also beautifully written and contain the most, I don't even know how to say this, I don't want to say lofty levels of wisdom. He is communicating with the guys upstairs, and this is another thing that we have in common, is that he's connecting with the higher level of consciousness to pull down the wisdom that infuses all of his books. But every single one of them, Muddy Tracks is an autobiography, a spiritual autobiography, fascinating. I'm reading it right now. And all the rest, and Frank, you can correct me if I'm wrong, the only other ones that I've read so far is Sphere and the Hologram. I honestly couldn't put it down in France. I should have been sightseeing in France, and I was sitting out in front of Liz's house reading this book, and really it's quite amazing. The information that I get from my meditative writings, I really focus on my life situation and understanding the factors and forces around me. But Frank is going so high, and he's pulling down philosophical wisdom and just really complex and wonderfully, complex is not the word. You can say something about it, Frank. Just fascinating and wonderful and profound information. And so then I next met Frank after I came back from France, and here he is looking a bit bemused, as if he's not quite sure what's going to happen here at the Monroe Institute's June program this year. It was another discovery program, and this is Dirk Dunning, his friend. These guys are just bosom buddies and pal around together, and if you're not careful, you'll get a boost of healing energy from both of them lined up together at the Monroe Institute. Just really fun to be around both of them. And Frank's brainwaves, if I may say, well, I know that I may say because I've gone and put his study up on the Mind Mirror research page of the website with his permission. At TMI during the June training, he was producing incredibly beautiful awakened mind patterns with his eyes open. And then he picked up pen and paper and was producing some lovely gamma synchrony patterns. I see that some of you here are gamma synchrony producers, so you know what a state of consciousness that is. That means that you're tuned into who Frank calls the guys upstairs. We might call it spiritual ecstasy, mystical union, whatever it is. It's a level of high frequency gamma that informs and stabilizes the awakened mind and the evolved mind patterns. And then he produced an enormous number of evolved mind patterns. And then I went to his house after the training at TMI, and we did about an hour-long session, and that's the one that's up on the website. And it's really fascinating because I used every single one of the data analysis windows that we now have, including the new coherence reports. And as you'll see, this is the brainwave pattern of someone who's absolutely tuned in, and more so channeling that information right into his books and his novels. And so it is my great pleasure to present to you the author of this lovely book, Imagine Yourself Well, and the subtitle is A Practical Guide to Using Visualization to Improve Your Health and Your Life. And I read it, and I promise you, it's a heck of a fine investment, as are any of his books. So Frank, first of all, we want to thank you and welcome you for being here, and just open this program up and let you take off on the crest of a wave and let this thing flow out just as it may and might.
Now I don't dare say anything because nobody could live up to that, Judith. I will say, in relationship to what happened in March, I learned all about Judith right away just watching her, because she just gives everything. And she had actually gotten to the point, you know how sometimes you get to the point where you're too tired to accept help, and she was almost there. So I basically just said, sit down and do this. And I saw the same thing again in our program. Judith was working, I don't know how, 16 hours a day, a long time, and just kept on giving. The Energizer Bunny there. So thank you for all of that. Thank you for reading my books. I always like that too. When I give talks in person, well, this is as close to in person as we need to be. When I give talks, I usually start by saying, I don't regard myself as a performer and you as the audience, but we're sitting here thinking together for a few minutes. And so let's just take a minute and let's just gather our energies, holding the intent that I'll say something that'll be worthwhile, that questions will come that'll make it more important and as Judith said, deeper. And then we'll go from there. But first, let's just gather our energy. Won't take long. Now, of course, in person, you can really tell that right away. When we're sitting in a room at Monroe Institute, I give them maybe 20 seconds, and it seems like forever. But afterwards, everybody is a little more coherent. I hardly know where to start because everything connects with everything else. But let's start with Mind Mirror, since that's probably our common denominator. I've been talking to what I call the guys upstairs, as Judith said, for over more than 25 years. And I've become quite an expert in it because I've made every mistake that I could find. And every mistake will teach you something if you learn from it. And some of the suspicions that I had about the process really still lingered. For instance, they later gave us a concept of what they call an expanded or a temporary group mind. And I would say that's what's happening here right now. They say whenever two or more people are communicating, whether or not they're all in the body or not, whenever they're communicating, they are temporarily sharing a mind. Now, that doesn't mean you know everything I know and I know everything you know, but it does mean there's a commonality there. Well, when you're talking to the guys upstairs, and you could ask Judith, I'm sure she feels the same thing, half the time you're going, I don't know, this may be just me talking to myself. And if you do a Monroe program, you don't hear over 130,000 times, well, probably I'm just making this up, but. And of course, whenever somebody says that, you know that there's going to be something real that follows, because it's weird enough that they're feeling like, well, I better protect myself here. But one of the things I discovered is because you have that temporary group mind effect, you don't know whether it's your own mind or someone else's mind. And because I'm doing what they taught me, which they call ILC, for intuitive linked communication, it's not channeling, it's not trance channeling, certainly, and it's not just intuition. It's really a conversation with somebody who's not in the body. And as a result of that, I never know. In fact, I often will go back and I'll say, I didn't get that right, did I? Because it really is, even though it's in written form, it's in the form of a conversation. I will start off in an intuitive spot, in a receptive spot, and either I'll have a question or I'll say I'm open for business, or sometimes I'll say, what would I ask you if I had enough sense to know what it is that I ought to be asking you? It's anything to get the channel started. And, once in a while nothing happens, and so I go away and do something else. But mostly something will come on. Until June, when Judith showed me the printouts, I could never be 100% sure that even though let's put it this way, I knew and I didn't know. I knew and I doubted, because you can't do something for 25 years without it becoming so natural that you're not even sure whether you're in an altered state or not. In fact, I'm not sure what an altered state is anymore. I mean, we maybe are living in altered states. But then Judith shows me this printout, and she says, right there, see, you've got the delta flowing through the theta into the alpha, and the alpha's forming an alpha bridge up to gamma. And I'm going, wow, that's almost like something really happened. Now, we have a guy who comes to Monroe a lot. He must have done 50 programs. And he's a very analytical, scientific type. And he was always going, well, but how do I know, blah, blah, blah. And I think, Judith, it was last December that Larry was in your program and saw one of your printouts. And he said, this is the first time that I really know that this isn't just something I'm making up in my mind. Well, that attitude that I still share has its disadvantages, but it has a big advantage too. You don't really want to be a flake. I mean, if you do want to be a flake, that's fine. You feel free. But if you don't want to be a flake, and at the same time, you don't want to do only what's known. In other words, if you want to be an explorer, then you're going to have to go off in places where you really don't know what you're doing. And if you do know what you're doing, if you're following a roadmap, that's fine, but you're not exploring. And I was always more interested in exploring than anything else. Now, you might think, I've forgotten that we're going to talk about Imagine Yourself Well, but the whole concept of being in touch with your intuition is critical to the whole idea of how to manage your health this way. Here's the model that I proceed from now. We are here in 3D, obviously, and we have 3D limitations. But we also extend into the non-3D. And that is a critical factor, because people say, well, I really wish I could be psychic. And I look at them and I'd say, well, I'd like to see you be in a body and not be psychic. Because we are all psychic, because we're all part of the 3D and the non-3D at the same time, start from the bottom on this table, unlike the way you would ordinarily do. And if you look at it, you'll see the way I have sort of made a chart of the various levels of healing resources that are available to us. So if you're what I call downstairs only, if you're a person who's only aware of the time and space continuum, the way we experience it, 3 dimensions, one moving moment, the limitations of the body. If that's true, the only degree of control you're going to have is physical things and physical results. And the only resources you're going to have are automatic body mechanisms. So what I mean by this is, if you get sick, you're going to have to go to a doctor, you're going to have to use medicine, you're going to have to at least do the things like rest and common sense things that can be done, but you're not going to know how to load the dice. Go up one level. There are people that I say are connected upstairs. That means they don't necessarily know that they're connected, but they sort of follow hunches. They're the kind of person you would say is naturally lucky. For them, their resources are the lower levels that are already there, plus they have instinctive knowings, okay? They might not know why, but they know if I do this, this will be good for me. Go up another level, and these are the people who know how to load the dice. There's no point in playing an honest game if you can fix the dice. And what this means to me is, these are people who, knowing full well that they're in the 3D, have also realized that they extend beyond the 3D, and they've relinquished, to a degree, what we would think of as commonsensical controls. And they've said, okay, there's more here that I know than I'm aware of. Let that work. And so, in other words, this allows them to focus unconscious processes. And this gives them everything that the lower levels have, plus they can learn to direct energy in the way, for instance, that I did with Judith. When I could see that she needed a boost, I not only could intend to help her, but I knew how to let the energy flow. The next level up is healers, and I expect that most of the people in this conversation are healers. You have a sure connection. You know that you are upstairs as well as downstairs. You don't have to wonder about it. You don't have to second guess yourself. And you allow the wiser part of yourself to direct. This gives you everything you had at the lower levels. Plus now, it's not only direction from your 3D conscious self, but you're allowing direction from a higher level than you even are aware of. And then finally, if we got to the top level, there have people like Jesus, people like any kind of miracle worker that you've heard of. There's no distinction between 3D and non-3D for them, as far as I can tell. There are no barriers that prevent them from going beyond a certain amount. And what they can do, we don't know the limits to what they can do. This is literally bringing somebody back from the dead. Well, you can see right there, just from that little tiny bit, my approach to healing depends upon the understanding that we're here in 3D and we're also in non-3D, and we have resources that we don't know of. And I think what I'll do is I'll talk a little bit about the difference between 3D and non-3D. I'm going to have to ask your indulgence because I'm going to have to say things as if I know them and we're sure of them, I mean, sometimes you just have to do it. Otherwise, every sentence winds up with a qualifier. Well, as far as I know, and there's no point. Here's what I've been told and what I've gathered over the years. The 3D world that we are aware of was deliberately constructed because there are things that can be done here that cannot be done in the non-3D. And if you look at the distinction between the two kinds of worlds, you see what they are. In the non-3D, everything is more or less connected. Everything, they don't have the barriers between them that we do. Each of us is living in a separate body, and so we tend to assume we're separate from everyone else. We assume even that our minds are separate. Now, at this level, probably we don't, but most people do. We assume that this present moment exists right now, but it didn't exist a moment ago, and it won't exist a moment from now. So it's like we're jumping on ice floes across the river, and if you don't get to the next moment quickly, I don't know where you'd be. Well, that's how it looks in the non-3D. And I'm told that was designed that way for a very special reason, which is it allows certain combinations of strands to be put together in a form of, let's say, in a crucible, all right? And we live our life deciding, what am I going to be? What am I going to do? What am I going to be? We have what looks like the external world affecting us all the time. And we have to decide, how am I going to react to that? What am I going to do? Recently, in the past year, we've started talking about the distinction between first, second, and third tier results. And which has, I learn a lot in these conversations, even though it's my pen writing it out. It's a funny feeling. A first tier event is what happens to you. All right. So Viktor Frankl winds up in a concentration camp. Your second tier event is what you decide about that. What are you going to do about the thing that you're in that you may not have any control over? And the third tier effect is, how does it change you? How are you at the end of your life that you wouldn't have been otherwise? The whole purpose of 3D life, as I've been told, is for us to choose and choose and choose and choose, and in so doing, create ourselves. Okay? And as an example, supposing that throughout your life, every time you had a choice, you chose love. You chose to extend yourself. You chose to be sort of like Judith. Okay? Or supposing you chose just the opposite, and every time there was a choice, you said, me first and everyone else a long way second. Or supposing during your life, it's sometimes one, sometimes the other. You can see that at the end of the life, the soul that you have created, the mind that you have created, is going to be very different depending on what your choices were during your time in this crucible. Well, this 3D crucible is very brightly lit, so to speak. It's very intense. You can feel that. You know, we have no choice physically but to live in the present moment. I mean, there's no other way to do. You can remember last Tuesday. You can look forward to next Tuesday, but you're here now, and you can't help yourself. And I often tell people, if you doubt that, well, just take a match, put it under your palm of your hand, and think about next Tuesday and see how well that works out. It's not going to work out. But your mind doesn't have those limitations, because our minds are actually in the non-3D, communicating through our brain to the 3D. That's the whole basis for all of the communication with the other side that it goes on all the time. You've seen this book, a great book. Buy it in bulk. You don't even have to read it. Put it under your pillow. You'll get enlightened. It's no problem. The first thing I need to tell you is, imagine yourself well by visualization does not mean you're going to get perfect health. I'm not even sure that perfect health is what we're here for, because health problems can be very productive. It depends on what you do with them, all right? But leaving that to the side, this has been front and center for me since I was 2 years old, because I've had asthma my whole life. It's very interesting when you look at your life carefully, how orchestrated parts of it are and how suspicious parts of it are. Because here I am, a little kid, and I have asthma, and this is back in the 1940s and 50s, and there's not much they know how to do. I spent years going to my local doctor a couple times a week, I guess, for a shot, hoping, that the shot would provide me with some immunity. It really, I don't think did any good. This was in the days before inhalers or nebulizers or things. And, you could wind up in a hospital fairly easily with asthma. And there wasn't a whole lot they could do. You wind up in Philadelphia on an oxygen tent. It's okay if you're bored and you need nothing else to do. But anyway, at the same time that I had asthma and had no idea what to do about it, there was a part of me from some other time, some other place, that knew that if I could just turn something, if I could just figure out how to turn that knob, I would be fine. Now, that kid wasn't even 10 years old. Where did that idea come from? It came from some inner knowing. And it turned out that inner knowing was right, except that the boy's interpretation of it wasn't right. So I thought it meant just, you might say, the equivalent of having a positive attitude, or of trying, if I could just try hard enough. And of course, it doesn't work. I say, of course, it could have worked, perhaps, but I didn't have the keys that I needed, all right? It took a long time before I realized that, for one thing, our health is a ratio between our mind and our body, between the mental health and the physical health. And I realized this in a very funny way. I had just come home from college, and it was June the 5th, I think it was, of 1967. And I went downstairs, and this is back in the age when we still put on the radio in the morning, if you can imagine that. Turned on the radio, and there was the news, and the news was that the Israelis had just invaded Egypt and Syria and Jordan. In other words, it was the beginning of the SixDay War. Well, I had been following that closely in college because I was in a course in political geography, and I knew that Egypt closing the Straits of Eilat, the Israelis would have to do something because too much of their exports went through that strait. Anyway, it doesn't matter that. The shock of that of hearing that was so intense that I was, after 2 days of being totally unable to breathe, I was all of a sudden well. And I thought, well, that's interesting. And I was well for the rest of the summer until I went back to school. Many, many years later, and like 30 years later, I was visiting a friend, and we were in the habit of talking to the guys upstairs. He would ask the questions, and I would lie down on the couch, and I would, just do what we just described, and say what came through. Well, if any of you have asthma or have breathing problems, you know that the one thing you can't do is lie flat on your back. I mean, good luck. Well, I had been having trouble. In fact, I was coughing continuously during this time, and Ed said, well, it's too bad, but would like to talk to him. And I said, well, let's try. I'm not doing anything anyway. I lay down on the couch. My coughing stopped. He asked the questions. We went for about half an hour. The side of the tape ended. I got up to go to the bathroom before we'd start again. And Ed said, is there anything you'd like me to ask on your behalf? And I had started coughing. And I said, yeah, ask them how come when I'm talking to them, everything's fine. And as soon as I stop, I'm back to coughing again. Well, I didn't get to the bathroom door, and I knew what the answer was. And when I got back, we talked to them, and they said it's exactly right. Your health is a ratio between your physical and your mental conditions. Okay. When I was talking with the guys, I would change where I was mentally. I couldn't change physically that fast, but I could change like this mentally. And that's what happens. If you change the mental half of the equation, you can change right away, but it's very hard to maintain it, because changing mental states is practically a definition of mind activity. If you change the physical side, it's slow. It might take you weeks, it might take you days. It's hard to know, but it'll tend to persist more. So you can get your quick fix with your mind. You need your slower fix is having the body take it. Okay. Well, that was kind of a big eye-opener, as you can imagine. And a few years later, I read one of Dion Fortune's wonderful books. Judith, you like novels. You'd love Dion Fortune's 6 novels. She was one of the founders of the Society for the Inner Light in England, knew a hell of a lot. And she put a lot of it into her 6 novels. First one I read, I was just with my mouth open. I said, I didn't know you could write like this. It was like one initiate talking to another initiate, and you're getting to overhear. It's phenomenal. Well, in one of her novels, the protagonist has asthma, and he was talking about the various problems that he has. And he said, but one day he fell down a flight of stairs, and by the bottom of the flight of stairs, instead of being sick as he had been, he was well. And I thought, yes, that's that same thing. That's that shock that moves you out of the space. Now you're probably asking, why is he saying all these things? There are, I think, 4 assumptions that our society has that are dead wrong, and they make it impossible for us to be anything but a victim. And the first one is that things just happen. Chance exists, and so do accidents and coincidences. And the second one is that illness is externally caused. We can become ill for reasons that are beyond our control, reasons that have nothing to do with our life. The third one is that our physical, mental, emotional, spiritual components are separate and distinct from each other. That is, what happens to the body is not necessarily related to what's going on with your emotional or mental life, let alone your spiritual life. And the fourth one is that the physical body is a mechanical system. That is, it may be effectively treated as if it were a machine, with chemical intervention backed up by mechanical intervention. I don't think any of those assumptions are true. My experience argues that in trying to correct or sustain your health, it's worthwhile to live believing just the opposite. It's not true that things just happen. It's not true that we become ill for strange reasons that don't have anything to do with anything. It's not true that our physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual components are separate and distinct. And it's certainly not true that the physical body, is a mechanical system. Rather than leaving that as negatives, let's put it into positives.
Can you repeat the name of that French author? Some people are asking about it.
French author.
Oh, the author you mentioned had the 6 books.
Yeah, Dion Fortune, Dion Fortune, like in fortune, Fortune. She's not French; she's English.
Ah,
And she was actually a psychotherapist, psychoanalyst back in the days before you had to be a doctor before you could become one. She was one of the very first ones. And her real name is Violet Firth, Firth, but she wrote under the name Dion Fortune. And she wrote probably dozens of books, certainly more than a dozen. Okay, this is fabulous, fabulous author.
thanks for that.
Okay, all right. So here's the deal. If you take those 4 unconscious assumptions and turn them around, look what a picture of human health you get. If chance, accident, and coincidences are only appearances, then everything in your life is meaningful. If illness expresses something in our inner condition, it may be quite valuable. If our physical, spiritual, emotional, and mental aspects are vitally interconnected, those interconnections can be of great use to us in understanding and overcoming illness, and hence in restoring and maintaining health, and going beyond that, overcoming the things that brought the illness in the first place. In other words, just not being sick is well and good, but not being sick and being beyond where we didn't know we were causing ourselves problem is better. And finally, if you can communicate with your body and its organs, you can establish a feedback loop that will prove very powerful. And of course, this is what we have done.
If we have these capabilities, what gets in the way of our using them?
Oh, that's good. Yeah, that's a good way to look at it. It's the same thing as if we're psychic, how come we don't know we're psychic, really? We live in a society, in a civilization, that is still firmly entrenched in this materialistic superstition that says, well, if you can't measure it, it doesn't exist. And even if it does exist, it probably doesn't really mean much because it's not important. But it's not that simple, but that's really the key to it. If you start from the assumption that you're psychic and everybody else is psychic, everything looks different. Now, if you start from the assumption that my health is as much a clue to my mental state as it is to anything else, or if you start from the assumption, to look at it a different way, that anything external is a clue to something internal that's being presented to me, those are going to change your life quite a bit. But at first, they're going to be a leap of faith because the only way to prove it is to prove it. The only way to prove it is to live it. Okay? Because I was in communication with my upstairs, and because I learned something about healing just through, it just happens, really. I don't know any other way to describe it. If you're interested in healing, let's put it this way. You know how the Course in Miracles people say there are only 2 real basic forces. They say love and fear. And some people thought, well, that's wrong. It must be love and hate, but it isn't. It's love and fear. And the way I see that is this. Love is reaching outwards, reducing boundaries, extending. Fear is saying, well, this is me and that's not me. This is me and I need a little protection here. I know that ideally it would be lovely if we could all live in total openness, but I don't know if that's even possible here in duality. I mean, it may be that sometimes it's appropriate to let the fear say, I'm going to protect myself. It doesn't necessarily feel good, but it's there and it's a part of life. Certainly, if you walk in a crowded shopping mall or if you're on an airplane or something, you may want to pull in your aura, as they say, and just, reserve your energy to yourself. But to the degree that you extend yourself, you can automatically bring in healing. You can automatically be a healer. I believe I told you, Judith, that I don't really let people call me a healer or even a self-healer in public because it's true as far as it goes, but it's very misleading because we're all healers and we're all self-healers as far as we let ourselves be. My friend Colin Wilson was a long-time psychic investigator, but at the same time he had this thorough going belief that he was, as he said, ESP thick. He had this absolute conviction. It can be done, but I can't do it. Until the day that his infant daughter got really, really sick with a fever. And I don't remember why, but there wasn't anything that could be done. And he knew by putting his hand on her that he could help her, and did. But he was consistent enough not to let that interfere with his belief that he was ESP thick. That was just, he put that off to the side. You know. And in fact, while I'm on that subject, a friend of mine said that the reason we think we're more, how should we say, commonsensical than we are, is because what happens in life is you're going through life with your own idea of who and what you are, and then you have an anomalous experience that really doesn't fit into it at all. Well, you've already got yourself defined, so you take that anomalous experience and you put it over here, and you go back to being the ordinary self. And another one happens, and maybe another one. And you have one anomalous experience too many, and all of a sudden they link up, and you realize, my God, my life's been magical all along. That's what leads people to realize, oh, yeah, healing is just a part of life. I can do that. You know, and I imagine probably everybody who's self-selected into this group is in that same situation. So, and this leads into robots. I learned how to do healing. I learned it the hard way, as usual, as the way I usually do things. Every wrong idea that I came across, I tried and found, oh no, that didn't work, but this did work. But why did it work, you know? And I began, at first, I thought the healing was a matter of pushing the energy into a person. So the absolute opposite of what you want to do, but you know, you have to learn the hard way. But another thing was I was listening to my intuition. And I was working with an elderly friend once, and I say, well, I'm going to put my hand here on your shoulder. I don't know why, really, or I'm going to do this or that. Finally, she just said to me, stop apologizing. And when I stopped apologizing, that opened it up. Because then, you know, you're just letting it flow through and you're doing what you're told. Doing what I'm told is not my best thing, but in this case, that's what I do. Well, about, my God, it's been 10 years now ago, 10 and a half years ago, a friend of mine that I had known for several years had a problem. She was the kind of person who overworks, and she had overworked her hand, knew that she was injuring her wrist, but thought, well, there's just a little bit more to do. I'll finish, you know. And as a result of that, she had, I forget if it was 2 or 3, I think it was maybe 3, these fingers weren't really working well anymore. And like she tried to type and they would just drag, you know, and it was impossible. Well, she sort of, she tries to tough things out, and she did for over a year. And finally her guys upstairs said, go see Frank, he can help. Okay. So she came down to see me, and we spent that day working on it, and we could get it to the problem turned out not to be the fingers, actually it was the wrist, but we didn't learn that for a while. By working with her and, you know, helping her with the energy and all, we could fix it for a few seconds, and then we'd go back. And we could fix it again and go back and okay, what's going on here? This is very strange. And then, I won't go through the hits, runs, and errors, but what we discovered, what I guess actually what I was told and finally listened to, is that sometimes you have a physical ailment because somebody inside of you needs to get your attention, and you're not paying attention, and this is something you will listen to. Well, when I heard that, I went back a few years because I remembered the wife of a friend of mine was working in her garden, and she overdid. She always overdid. And Skip said, well, we got to go. I got to go outside and slow her down. He and I were talking inside, and she was out gardening. And I said, what's going on? He said, well, she's got arthritis, and the arthritis in her shoulder gets really bad because she overworks. So we went out, and I said, are you open to some energy work? And she is. She was very open to it. So she sat down, and I had her talk to her guys, right? And I said, or actually, I phrased it in a different way. I said, pretend you're talking to your shoulder as if your shoulder was a separate intelligence with its own mind, which really is true enough. And I said, ask it, why does it come off with this arthritic problem every so often? Well, she's in very good connection. And it didn't take 2 minutes, and she had the most sheepish expression on her face. And she said, "It slows me down." And I said, well, okay, make a deal with your shoulder. Whenever you're on the point of overworking, have it twitch your little finger against your will. In other words, just to get your attention. But your half of the deal is when you feel the little finger twitching, you have to stop. You may make a deal, you have to keep your half of the deal. Well, she did. And I haven't kept up with it, but for about 2 or 3 years afterwards, she hadn't had any problem with that again. That was before I was dealing with Nancy, so that was in the background. And when I saw that this thing was just not working, then I said, okay, there's something going on. And she and I began talking to think of how to put this. Rather than going to how we discovered it, I'll tell you where we wound up. I sometimes call them robots. I sometimes call them EXE files. You computer geeks in the crowd, an EXE file is a file that will do something all the time. And it will never change. It always does the same thing. But if you call it up and change it and resave it, then it'll do what you resaved it to do. Well, in a way, you could look at these as EXE files, okay? Here's what happened. Something happened in the past. There was a trauma, whether it was physical or emotional or whatever, and this took it on. And it thinks, for whatever reason it thinks, that it's helping you. And one thing that I have observed, which is a very hopeful thing, is all of our problems do stem from somebody inside thinking it's helping us. Now, that might seem counterintuitive, but after a while you realize that's a terrific opportunity. Well, if it's there and it's doing something, and it's doing it, and it's doing it, you don't want it, you can't stop it. The way to do it is not to cuss it out, and the way to do it is not to get involved in a big fight with it, but talk to it. Pretend, and it's really only a form of pretending, it's really what you're doing. Talk to this separate intelligence and say, thank you for trying to help me, but this is not what I need. This is not what I want. Maybe at one time I thought it was, or maybe it looked like it was, but here's what I really want at this point. And you will find that that separate intelligence does exactly, it does its best to follow what you want. Now, sometimes you have to persuade it that you really mean it, which is really funny. And you wind up getting in an argument with yourself, or that's how it seems. But ultimately, if you say to it, look, I'm in the body, I'm the consciousness, I have the right to decide, do this, you won't have a terrible problem with that. Now, that's not the end of the story. I did this, for instance, with asthma, looking for the various roots of it. Well, it turned out that it isn't a problem with a cause or even a symptom, but there are lots of them, and you might root out this one and this one and this one, but if you have others left, it might still be there. And what I think will typically happen is it will change its manifestation. In my case, it's gotten much less severe. The symptoms have changed radically and for the better. Instead of coughing and wheezing all the time, now I just wind up with shortness of breath. Well, you can deal with that, because if you have asthma and you're coughing all the time or you're wheezing, it can be very difficult to get your breath at night, and it's almost impossible to rest, Well, if it's just shortness of breath, you just go sleep. It's not a problem. Now, I need some feedback here. Judith, do you think that I've explained that in a way that makes sense, or have I left stuff out?
No, I think you did a beautiful job on that. And as you were explaining it, I was reflecting inwardly that what you call robots are the unconscious patterns that we, as awakened mind practitioners and self-trainers, consider to be parts or issues that get stored in the subconscious and the unconscious mind, and thus we end up projecting them outwardly, and also they become our blind spots, and we are very interested in rooting them out. I like your description of them as robots, though, because that's exactly what they are. I mean, they take on a life of their own, and
Although
there's no stopping them. They're the Energizer battery robots. I mean, they do just keep going on and on and on.
now that brings up a couple of points, though. One, everything in our life that comes at us could be looked at as information. I tell people our lives are like this. You can't see behind where my hands are now. You can't see behind your own eyes. So most of what you are, everybody else around you knows much better than you do. Now, they don't know your inner life, but they know a lot about yourself that you don't. But the outer world will feed it to you. And as Carl Jung said, if you don't know who you are, the world will tell you. So I give an example. I have what I call the Velcro example. Supposing we're driving down the road, we're driving down an interstate, and you are interested in trucks. That's all you're interested in, trucks. You don't care about cars at all, okay? So we drive down the road for, say, 8 hours. At the end of the day, I said, wow, did you see that 1965 Corvair? He said, no, because you didn't. You're interested in trucks. The Corvair didn't even show up. Now, that's an emotionally neutral example, but here's another one. Supposing somebody says something, and it's just so off the wall, and you just look at it and you just laugh and you go, God, where are they coming from, right? That's a good sign that you don't have Velcro for that one. But if somebody does something equally off the wall and you get angry or you get infuriated, or you just, I want to tell those people to get with the act, that's a sign that there's something inside of yourself that you haven't realized that the world is very nicely putting in your face, okay? So we can use the entire world as a feedback device in that case. But speaking about feedback devices, a question that arose in my mind, even while I was talking to you, Judith, is how can you use Mind Mirror to help people find when a robot is in action? Is that something you've ever looked at?
Yes, and of course, where you're looking at higher perspectives and non-3D reality, I've spent my whole life doing meditative writings to find out the causes of my emotional and very often physical issues.
Mm-hmm.
And for us, it's a matter of quieting our beta waves and generating alpha waves and dropping below alpha into theta and just sitting and listening quietly until we get those answers. But I think that your great value to us here today is not just in the realization that this dynamic or the system exists for us to be able to ask and get these answers, but as you wrote in your book, that how do we know we've got the right answer? And you talked about the different kinds of psychics and psychic reception, and so I remember this great story one time. I took a class on how to be psychic or something. And this woman told this story about having done a reading for this guy who was in a hospital. And he had called and contacted her because he was about to have his foot amputated. And she heard very clearly, "You just won't stop. You won't get off of me. I'm so tired." I don't know if it talked in that tone, but that was the message. And so she relayed that to the guy, and he said, "Oh," he said, "I'm always on my feet. I stand up at work and then I get home and somehow I'm always on my feet." And so he did start talking to his feet. And then he got this agreement with his feet that he wouldn't cut them off if they would calm down, and then for his part, thenceforth, he would stop standing on his feet so much and get a different kind of job. He checked himself out of the hospital, and that was that.
Wonderful.
But what if he hadn't been a very good listener, and the answer he had got was, "I hate you. I want you to cut me off," or something like that, and then whap, So I mean,
Well,
trusting has very real consequences. So how do you know the difference between a real and a false answer?
You know what they say in the Bible, test the spirits. And what I take that to mean is this. Any kind of psychic information is always a two-part process. First, perception. Second, interpretation or analysis. Now, you can't do them both at the same time. As soon as you start perceiving something, you've stopped. As soon as you start interpreting it, you've stopped perceiving. And when you're perceiving, you don't have time or ability to analyze. But that's as it should be. it's a reciprocating process. And it doesn't matter if you reciprocate 10 times a second or if you do the whole perceiving and then later come in and do the analysis. But if you don't do the analysis, you're in danger of becoming a flake. And if you don't do the perception in the first place, what are you analyzing? So I think the short answer there is you have to be conscious. The whole purpose of getting in touch with our upstairs component, our non-3D component, is not to get rid of our 3D component. It's to supplement it. It's to make it better. But the only way to do that is do the same thing with that input that you do with your everyday 3D input. So if you, for instance, well, you and I do the same thing. If you sit in and talk to the guys by way of a journal, that has the advantage that it's there in written form. You can go back and look at it later. So on the one hand, you write it down and you take it as if you're believing everything that's there. But after a couple of days, when you're no longer in that same space, you're no longer in the joint mind that created it, then you can look at it and say, well, is this also prudent? Does this also make sense to me? And if you're not sure, well, all right. But, maybe a shorter way of saying it is, my way of doing things is to jump in with both feet, but with the understanding that I can change my mind and say, no, I was wrong, and just go off in another direction. If it resonates now, that's the only useful question that I know. This goes off into another topic, but when I talk to people about how to get in better touch with their intuition, I say to them, well, I just totally lost the thought. It just went off into cyberspace. It may come back, it may not. What were we talking about? It was about...
That's the trouble with intuition, you get so high. You're getting on the right side of your brain, and there are the words on the left. While you get that back, there was something. Go ahead.
No, I say if I get it back. Go ahead.
There was this great thing in your book about psychics and what I'm trying to find it now. How do you know how to trust? Something about psychics. That I think it was something like there are 4 different kinds of psychics or ways to perceive psychic information and what to avoid.
Okay, and thank you. That also reminded me of what I was beginning to say there. When I talk to people about intuition, I tell them there are all these questions that people tend to ask, and they're what I call the useless questions. And I made a point of getting them out here too. Am I just making this up? Who or what is the source? Can I trust the source? Is the information true? None of those questions are any good to you at all because they can't be answered. You can decide on an answer, but they can't really be answered. The only answer that I know that is the only question that is useful, maybe 2. The first one is, does this material resonate? If it resonates, I stick with it. Now, maybe 2 minutes from now, it doesn't resonate anymore, and I said, no, that was wrong. But as long as it resonates, I go with it. The other question, not quite as useful, but worthwhile. What can I do with this? What can I do with this information? Okay. Now, those are the 2 things to keep it real, is what I would say. Now, it's true that there are different ways of perceiving things. Some people get it in a way that's really kind of, well, I want to say it's magical to me, and yet I realize occasionally it happens to me, and that is kinesthetically. They'll feel something on their arm, or their body will act as this very sensitive mechanism. Some people get visuals, and I have a certain decent envy of that. I don't get many visuals. Some people hear voices, and mine basically is the most direct and the most underrated, and that's just knowing. It comes in and you know. Well, all of those are very, they're like Carl Jung's various ways of psychic, of functioning in the world. They're all appropriate at a given time. It isn't appropriate for you to only be one, but at any given time, one will work better than the other. So what I tell people often in the little classes or in my talks to them is, okay, if we say, now we want you to do a visualization, and you think that means close your eyes, the movie's about to start, and your manner of perceiving things is kinesthetic, you're going to say nothing happened. Or if you get an emotional response, but you're looking for a vision, nothing happened. Or if you just know, and this is the funniest thing, because this has happened with several of my friends who began to do this. They would begin to ask the questions of the guys, and they were at a point now where they were expecting an answer, and they were almost frustrated because the answer would come before they could finish the question. Rather than discrediting it, I said to them, that's perfect. That's exactly it. Just as a little bit of information, I read somewhere that the unconscious mind processes material 1,000,000 times faster than the conscious mind. While we're processing 35,000 bits, it can process 30, whatever that is, 1,000,000 times 35,000. It's more than a couple. It's really an unbelievable disparity. But that makes sense now of why, before you even finish the question, boom, the answer's there. And in fact, when my friend Rita Warren and I were doing this 27 years ago, it's impossible, 17 years ago, when we began doing this, talking with the guy, she had this long list of questions. And she told me later that sometimes they would be answering her question that she hadn't yet asked. Well, I didn't know that, of course, because all I'm doing is just repeating whatever comes to me. But she found that really striking. Have we any questions?
And now I see a question from Joel Mitchell.
Joel?
I loved what you talked about before about, you said something like perfect health is not the point, but that this helps us choose and choose and choose and choose. I've had incredible teaching through this voice that has come to me lots of times in different times in my life. So like I was deathly ill, and the voice came to me and basically said, do you want to stay or do you want to go?
Wonderful.
And I was freaked out, and it said, do you want to stay or do you want to go? And I realized that, it's my choice. So okay, I'm going to stay here. And so I was instantly, 2 days later, I was out of the hospital. And the thing is that I realized that the learning about that was something that I still keep learning things about that voice, what it was telling me then. And there are several other things from my childhood that there were specific lessons that this voice or whatever that is was teaching me. So now at this point in my life, you were talking also about, you ask the woman to listen to her shoulder, which I do this with people all the time. I have to, have them speak, have their bodies speak to them and all this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm interested in your ideas about what new kind of relationship I could make with this wisdom that's there for me.
That's a funny question in a way, because you have a much better source than any extra. No, all right, that's not quite true. I was about to say, you're already connected upstairs, and what could be better than that? But it is true that sometimes they seem to use us to help each other, because we sometimes pay more attention to something that comes through the senses than we do if it's just coming directly. We either disregard what's coming or we don't even notice it. As an example, did you ever say something to somebody and it didn't seem particularly profound to you, but you were just moved to say it, and it has this great impact on them? Yeah. In that case, I would say that's their guys upstairs using you to get their attention. Okay, but nonetheless, I'm sure that you have what you need there. It interested me. What you got right away was what you got it without even. It was it didn't even announce itself, but it said, by the way, you now know forever that this is not just a collection of chemicals, and you're not just here in the 3D. You could never question it after that, right? Yeah. Because you were there with a miracle. That's one of the things I liked about asthma, by the way. You could be very, very well and very, very sick and very, very well, and you could do it very efficiently, so that you, when you were very sick, could still remember what it was like to be well. And when you were very well, you could remember what it was like to be sick. And it gave you an entirely different perspective on the world.
Yeah.
So now you're quick. Let's see if we can get the guys in here on this, because I assume they're willing to kibitz. Your question is there a new way for you to function, or is there a new source of information? How would you put that?
You know, I'm an explorer, and so I just wonder what else is possible.
Okay. Oh, okay. Oh, no, this is interesting. This is not what I would have said. I got immediately, I'll do it by way of telling a little story, not much of one. I was in a class and I was asking people, okay, you know, who is able to do healing, or who's able to do intuition and things like that. And one person responded that she could often do it for somebody else and not for herself. And I just laughed and I said, yes. And do you see why? Well, she didn't, but it was obvious to me. When you are trying to help somebody else, you're extending love to that person. And love is by definition an extension. All right, so you're connected and you're extending. You're doing it by yourself, maybe not so much. You don't think of it in those terms. So what I'm getting from them at this point for you immediately is, you could, I guess this is right. You could put it, love yourself more actively and more consciously, as if you were someone else.
Mm.
You see the gist of that? You don't take yourself quite so much for granted and reverence yourself more than you tend to. Does that ring true?
Mm. Wow. Yes.
Sounds like it did.
Yeah. Mm.
You already have a gift and you've already developed the gift. Maybe you're not giving yourself enough of it, or maybe you could give yourself more. You are an explorer. You want more. They're saying this is a way. Because one thing, the more we practice love and extension and giving, the easier it becomes and the more fulfilling it is. I've often said, if people ever realized how satisfying it is to give, we would be living in a different world. But instead, people tend often to be afraid. Maybe there won't be enough scarcity consciousness, you know. Judith, I saw that with you in that course. I thought, here's a person who just pours herself on forward. And she needs a little common sense. Somebody hit her on the back of the head, but but that's what I was seeing. So Joel, maybe that'll help.
Yeah, it does. I've just been getting this thing that my work now in the world is helping people into a more expanded version of themselves.
Yeah.
And I just wrote a little bit before. I was writing it to somebody else because I'm helping them do this with this giant project in the world. And I wrote about me doing that for me.
Oh, good.
No,
So,
isn't that sweet?
Yeah, no, but it's really, feels really spot on right now.
And the other thing that's interesting to me is that I didn't exactly have resistance, but I was a little self-conscious about saying that to you. You know, I don't know if I would have said it if I was just doing it on my own. So good.
Mm.
So may I add a little piece here? You know, this is a common, I don't want to say disease, but blind spot for healers, people who are teachers and healers, is that they are so busy taking care of other people that they don't first take care of themselves.
I'm sorry, what did you say, Judy?
I know, I heard you. I heard what you said. It's true. I mean, I live in my head, I live in my spirit, my poor little body just drags behind. But I know that this is very common among most all of us. And the steps in your book that have to do your 4-step process with finding the deepest causes of illness. The first one, ascertain that you are ready to be rid of the illness. So you have to be in very close touch with yourself to be able to ascertain. And you have to know yourself well enough, because a lot of people have, what do they call that? Secondary gains, and being ill. They're getting something out of it. It's working for them in some way to be ill, even though on another level they don't want to be ill.
Yeah,
So,
that's right. Yeah.
and even your second step, personify the illness or the part of the body. That's the one that you mentioned, that is experiencing or causing the illness. Well,
Mhm.
then that means that you have to have enough sustained awareness. And in order to have enough sustained awareness to do either one of these steps or the other two, you have to have a quiet enough mind. And, that's easy enough when you go into the meditation room. But can you pull that out of the meditation room so that when you're sitting on your couch and you decide to do some self-healing, that you can go back into that quiet state and connect with that part of yourself that's willing to talk with you? I mean, that really is one of the neatest things out of meditative writing that I have ever experienced. And for years it would say, well, ask your heart. And I'd say, yeah. And then continue to ask questions. And one day I went, oh, ask my heart. so then I wrote, heart, what do you have to say? And then I write heart, well, the heart had a lot to say about being always in a fight with the mind. And then one day I said, body, well, what do you have to say? And it said, nobody cares about me.
Yeah.
And so knowing that, as you wrote in your book, that everything is alive, everything is conscious. But one of the main things I ever learned from my meditative writings, to get back to this original point, is that that love is the carrier of healing, just as you said, and that without self-love, you can't make that connection to that source of healing, which certainly is within us, but it's on a non-3D level until we embody it. And so it really does all begin with love and compassion for self. That was the main thing I learned.
Well, one of the dumbest things I did for years and years and years, until one day something hit me on the back of the head with a 2x4. Having asthma, which made my life quite difficult all my life, and when you have something like that, even when you're well, at any moment you might not be. So it's always there. But when I would have trouble, I would be basically, not literally, but my attitude was basically cursing my lungs. It's just, why are you? And then one day I suddenly woke up and said, my God, it's doing all it can. They're doing all they can do in the face of all these massive handicaps. They need appreciation and love. They don't need criticism and anger. Well, the man with the feet, the same thing. Who didn't get amputated, the same kind of thing. If you look at it one way, it's you're letting me down. But if you look at it another way, it's okay. A, what are you telling me? B, what can I do for you? And C, what kind of arrow are you taking on my behalf? And it changes everything.
It's true. I just had a student here who realized in a meditation, his leg told him, I love me, basically. And then he came out of the meditation, he says, well, I've just been cursing that leg,
Yeah, exactly. That's just how dumb we are. Did you say there's a question, Alexandra?
Yes, we have people who would like to ask questions, and let me read one. It's from Veronica. She asks if you could talk about the practical application of using visualization to improve different areas of your life. I mean, you can choose however you would like to answer this question.
Okay, it's a good question too. Obviously, the reality is not as easy as people sometimes tend to make it. It can be made to sound really airy-fairy, and life is grittier than that. I often say to people, you'll find some New Age people who are all love and light until you dent their fender. Well, in a different way. So let's say you're looking at your career, okay, and you'd really like to use visualization to increase your career satisfaction or your opportunities or money or, whatever it would be. It isn't as easy as, okay, all I need to do is get it firmly in my mind and boom, it'll change. If it were, then you'd realize you were dead, because that's what the non-3D is like. The 3D is the land of delayed consequences. And it appears, I'm giving this to you a little secondhand, so I'm not quite as definite as if it had happened to me, but it appears that it's like you set out an intent and then life waits a little bit to be sure you really mean it, and you're not canceling it out 10 seconds later, or you're not canceling it out at the same time. Even though you're holding it, you're also holding something that does the opposite. The difficulty with all of these statements is then if it doesn't work, there are people who will basically make you feel guilty. If your mind was right, if you were more spiritual, if you were a better person, this wouldn't be happening to you. Well, if that were true, we'd be living in a much better behaved world than we are. It doesn't work quite as simply. But I think what you're asking, Veronica, if I'm not mistaken, is how can I best interact with the world? All right, let me back up just a little, because this is an interesting point, maybe. It's easy for us to say, I want this, and this would be the best thing for me. Then you come up against the question that I haven't talked about yet, which is which you. And boy, the guys upstairs are always getting on me on this one. There's the downstairs you that's living here in 3D, knows what it wants or thinks it knows what it wants, or maybe even is self-divided, and maybe it has a conscious wish, a contradictory conscious wish, and 3 or 4 unconscious wishes, all of them, which you, okay? More than that, though, maybe there's a higher level that says, you don't really want any of those things. That's not really going to do you any good. Now, it's not the same as saying, we don't want you to do that, because if there's one thing that they respect, it's our free will. Because if we're here to choose by choosing, how can you choose without choosing? And how can you choose by only choosing the thing that they approve and make any progress? So it isn't that. But there are so many possible contradictory levels to ourselves that how do we know what we really want? So in my case, I would like my books to sell well and to sell immensely and have a great influence on the world. Well, they don't. Does that mean I'm doing something wrong? I don't know. Does it mean I need to do more of the same? Does it mean I need to do something different? Does it mean maybe the time just hasn't come? Maybe they're never going to? Any of those things. They're all possible. Since I don't know the answer to those questions, how do I approach it? Believe it or not, this is trying to answer your question. All I can do, the only thing that I have command of is my intent. The more I look at it, what else is there? I mean, if you intend to be a good person, that doesn't mean you won't hurt somebody's feelings or you won't accidentally injure somebody or cause someone harm. But it means that you know what your intent is and you try to live it. All right? Well, it's the same thing when we want something for ourselves. If I intend to be a good author who can provide things that will help people, that's within my ability, the intent. The execution isn't necessarily. Maybe I just can't do what people need, or maybe I don't know what they want. If your intent is to have a satisfying career that will, I don't know, whatever, fill in your own blanks. It'll help people, or it'll provide you satisfaction, or it'll be there's a Greek definition of happiness as something like the exertion of your full powers in a life affording them scope. That might be your definition of what you want. I think the long and the short of it is all you can really do is hold your intent. But think how hopeful that is. That means all you need, because it's all you can do, all you need is to maintain awareness of what it is you are, who it is you want to be. Now, Oksana, would you ask Veronica if that answers your question? Because I don't know if it does or not.
She was asking about practical application of using visualization. So I think to improve different areas of life. But what do you mean by visualization, Frank? Do you mean intention, or do you mean anything else? And how we improve different areas of life with the key word was visualization and improve different areas of life. Yeah.
Okay. One of the ways that I suggest that people fix something that's wrong with them physically, in terms of health, since we're not experts, we're not doctors, and we may not even know what's wrong, but I say, so, okay, let's take it as an example. Suppose you have a sore throat. Create a visualization of the sore throat as it is. And maybe you have a visualization of a tube and it's all red and scratchy, okay? It doesn't have to be accurate. Who cares? It's a cartoon. Then visualize that, change the visualization to be what you would define as being the right thing. So that now it's, instead of being red and scratchy, now it's maybe pink and smooth and calm, all right? It is the changing of the forming of a visualization to say, this is what the situation is. And then the morphing of that visualization to be, here's what I need. And what I think is happening, it's only a guess, is that our conscious intent is speaking to our unconscious mind, which mainly deals with images, with cartoons. I don't know whether it's because of the 1,000,000-to-1 differential in speed or whatever, but the unconscious mind seems to understand visuals gestalts, actually, much easier than it does words, which are always sequential, okay? Our left brain has no problem at all with words, but it has a big problem with gestalts. The unconscious mind deals with gestalts, all right? So the whole thing is, make a visualization as a cartoon, and don't try to make the cartoon accurate. A cartoon is, by its definition, an exaggeration of something to make a point. Then envision it morphing to what you want. What you're doing there is you're taking you're expressing your intent by means of a visualization. Others?
Hi, this is actually very useful. So I have 2 questions. Am I becoming clear?
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah.
So one thing, Frank, you said was about resonating. You said if something resonates, go with it. If it stops resonating, then you can let it go. I found in my experience that, when I'm with my higher self, I seem to be resonating with some things. And then, with the blink of an eye, 10 minutes later, it's like my ego self has taken over and I no longer resonate with it. I don't want to necessarily go with what my ego mind is now telling me as reality. So, at that time, I'm not resonating with it, but it wouldn't be healthy for me to go with what's coming up at that point. So I'd love it if you'd speak to that. And then I have one other question.
All right. Well, on that part, I think one thing you might try, don't know if it would work, try personifying your ego mind and saying, what's your objection to this that I get that really resonates with me from upstairs? And have a conversation with it. I sometimes think that our bodies and parts of our minds feel seriously neglected and taken for granted. And maybe sometimes they act out like a little kid, I don't know. But I think the more conscious attention you pay to it, the better the chances that you can have a conversation there. The other thing you might try, if that doesn't work, okay, so supposing you've gotten this sense while you've been firmly connected, now you don't feel connected, and now it's what looks like obvious truth now looks like maybe airy-fairy. What's stopping you from reestablishing your connection then? If there's one thing I would love for people to do, it is to be just as normal and matter-of-fact about connecting as anything else in life. So friends will say to me, and they'll ask a rhetorical question, and I'll say, well, ask. And I'll say, well, maybe I will. I said, now. Don't go home and sit on the mat and stand on one leg. And ask now, because they're there. It's like they're 24/7, and what answers you don't get from them is never, your call is very important to us. They're always right there. So you might try those two things, okay, and see if one of them works. Any other question?
And thank
You had another question?
Yes. The other question is on, I have noticed that sometimes I give into food cravings, okay? And I'm sharing this for a reason, in that, I can know what the right thing to do is, okay? And I can be doing the right thing for a while, and then it's as if I get this overpowering feeling, and I know it's wrong, but I still will go out of my way to give into that food craving. And I know that my higher self is telling me not to do it. I even know my lower self is telling me not to do it, but still I'm doing it. And where does that come from, and how in the world can I stop this?
I'm going to ask you a dumb question. How do you know it's wrong? How do you know it's wrong?
Well, it's sometimes gluten, and that doesn't end up being good for my body. And, I just I don't feel good afterwards. I used to actually get sleepy afterwards, but now I just feel guilty doing it. And
I heard that.
okay,
I heard guilt.
I feel guilty, and I feel it's I should know better. And like sugar and stuff just isn't good. That's what we've heard, or that's what I have started believing, and so I don't like it when I do it.
Okay, but I'm going to question you here a little bit. I'll be your Dutch uncle for the moment, okay? You need a Dutch uncle, everybody. I guess you know that the Dalai Lama was told that he had to eat meat, that his blood type is such that it is, I don't know what his blood type is, but it's the type that does require meat. Well, in that case, for him to have said eating meat is wrong wouldn't really have been accurate. I recognize your thing with cravings, because I have exactly the same problem. But I don't think that things happen without a reason in life. And that doesn't mean that the reason is obvious. If you have all of a sudden a craving for sugar, or a craving for bread is a big thing for me. I love bread. Toast, it's good. If you have a craving for it, there's a reason for the craving. Now, it may not be that that's the right thing to do in terms of your health, but I'm not sure that it's necessarily true that it's the wrong thing. You're saying everybody says sugar is bad. Yes, but what if what your body needs at that moment can be gotten by sugar, although there might be a better way to do it? And I don't pretend to know any of this. I'm asking you the questions to try and encourage you to look at it a little differently. Because what you're doing here, now I'm rushing in where angels fear to tread, my very best thing. So you don't have to take this as gospel. But it seems to me that what you're doing is saying, here are the rules, and when I follow the rules, that's good. And then sometimes I don't follow the rules and I'm going to get in trouble. But I don't know that it's that simple, because where are those cravings coming from? Are they coming strictly from psychology? In other words, your unconscious mind? Are they coming from as a result of emotional conflicts? Or are they coming from the body itself wanting something? Until you know those things, and I don't really know how you would know them, I don't know that you're on firm ground to say, this is wrong, this is right. I know that it's saying, let me paraphrase what you're saying to yourself. This is not what I have decided is the right thing to do. And not quite the same thing. Okay. Now, why couldn't anyone in a situation like this refer it upstairs and say, okay, guys, what's going on here? And this is something I'd like to leave with everybody anyway. The better the question, the better the answer. So if you ask them, is sugar good for me or bad for me? That's nothing question. But if you ask, what's going on here? What are the underlying dynamics that lead me to have these cravings and fight the cravings? That's a better question, I think, than asking, is this or that food bad for me? Or what do I need to do to get some willpower so I won't be so pathetic? Which is going to be the way it's going to sound if all right? Does that make sense to you, to rephrase the question some?
Yes.
Because I think you have a potential here of learning quite a bit. And I suspect it's going to be learning something in a way and from a direction that you're not expecting at all. That makes sense?
That makes sense, and I'm grateful for trying. Yeah, thank you so much.
I was taking a drum lesson with my drum teacher about 4 months ago, and we were talking about a specific, technique, and I said, well, I'm not going to be a professional drummer. I'm probably not even going to play. I'm just doing this to, improve my rhythm, etc. And he says, oh, it doesn't matter. You're going to be dead in 6 months anyway. And when you talked about the fact that sometimes, like someone else's guys upstairs will be giving you a message or something like that, I could tell that this was completely unconscious. He had no idea he'd said it. And when I, raised it with him later, he said, what are you talking about? I would never say such a thing.
Yeah. Right.
But I could tell that there was some kind of a message there, and it certainly got my attention. I don't know if you have any additional insight on that, but that seemed like a pretty weird thing. I've mentioned it to some other people, and they all said that's weird.
Well, just like in a dream, things might mean this or they might mean that. That might mean in 6 months X is going to happen, and you don't know what it is, and things are going to be different. But my first question would be, how did you respond to it? What did you feel when you heard that?
Sort of like the wind sort of knocked out of my sail in a way. I remember leaning up against the piano and saying, well, why would I try to do anything then? I could be dead tomorrow.
So instinctively you kind of believe.
I said that to him, and he didn't seem to, it's funny, he didn't see that should have seemed like a real non sequitur to him.
Well, see, that doesn't surprise me, because I do think he was just being used. But I'm not sure he was being used in order for you to be given the day that you're going to die. I think he was being used to get your attention. And my question is, when you heard that, yes, it knocked the wind out of your sails, but did you have an instinctive belief, yes, this is true? Or did you think, what the heck's going, what was your reaction? Even after the fact, thinking about it.
Well, if I didn't have some concerns about my physical health, it wouldn't have made a big, I would have, not taken it nearly as seriously, I suppose. But
no.
I had some, conditions that seemed to be worsening, as it were. And I can't say that they've necessarily gotten any better. Some of it maybe seems to be even more noticeable to me. But it's interesting because I don't feel particularly fearful about it. I feel pretty motivated. I mean, I think Judith was saying, like her body chimed in, well, you never do anything for me. I definitely, have shaped up. I mean, I wasn't in bad shape, but I went back to the gym. I've, changed my diet some. I mean, I'm doing good things for the body. The body's happy enough as far as I can tell, except for.
Are you in the habit of talking to your upstairs component? Are you?
I don't know. I pray a lot, but I don't know that I do what you're talking about. And that's what I thought was interesting, because I don't know that I've ever felt like I had any guides. I don't know like that. Maybe there's a communication gap, and I just don't get over that.
My guess would be probably it's a conceptualization gap. People sometimes tend to think, well, I'm just a lowly worm and they're this exalted demigods, or oh, please, spirits, tell me what. I joke with my guys back and forth. We insult each other. We just treat it like a normal, friendly conversation. What if you had a conversation in writing just so it'll stay, you'll see it later? What if you had a conversation in the same way that you do emails? If you ever think about it, when you're doing an email, you don't really know, unless you already know the person, you don't really know who's on the other end of the line. There was an old cartoon, had a dog on a computer. He says, well, the nice thing about the internet is nobody knows you're a dog. You don't know who's on the other side of the line, and you don't need to, but their essence will come across. You get a feel for the person. And you don't know whether they're telling you the truth, whether they know what they're talking about, but you get in, you're talking that way. What if you approached it that way, work on the assumption that you have a non-3D component, which is willing and able to talk to you, and just have those conversations and ask, okay, what's going on? Were you trying to get a heads up? Was this a heads up for a reason? You know? Let me divert just to one thing on the side. It was told me quite a while ago, and as soon as I heard it, I realized it's so obvious. You see, particularly in the Bible, you'll see instances of somebody who is a prophet, and the prophet comes and says, unless somebody does this, this is going to happen, right? You know, and then my favorite one, of course, is Jonah, because Jonah goes to the other end of the world because he's not going to deliver that message because he knows what will happen. God will change his mind and make Jonah look like an idiot. And of course, what winds up happening is he does go deliver the message. They do all repent, and God doesn't destroy the city, and Jonah's furious. But anyway, that part's off to the side. The important thing is this. If we didn't have the ability to move to a different result, there would be no point in prophecy. Okay? So if you have something that says, well, you're going to be dead in 6 months, there would be no point in telling you that unless there was something, I don't want to say for you to do, or there was a point, you don't know what the point is until you find out. And I'm saying, try talking to the guys and seeing if you can find out that way. Does that seem like a possible approach? But not one you're going to do.
No, I'll be doing it.
Okay. All right. Can you?
I've got a lot at stake, as it were.
You say it does or doesn't?
I say it's like I've got a lot at stake. I mean, this kind of reframed most of the days since that day. Everything's looked a little different. I think it's been a good thing.
Yeah, that may be the reason for it. You know, now if you know who Edgar Cayce was, I suppose people do.
Yeah.
Edgar Cayce is a man who's helping people and healing and doing all of these things for 40 years, and his guys, are telling him, you have to do this and you have to stop doing this and don't do more than 2 readings a day. You know, it's World War II and he's trying to help people. So he's doing 7, 8 readings a day, and they say, you're wearing yourself out. And he asked for a reading one time as to what he can do. And the only thing they said is, you can do what we said last time. And they stopped. That was it. So finally they told him, go off to the mountains. This is late 1944. And they said, go off to the mountains and take a rest. And he said, how long? And they said, until you're either well or dead. And he died just a few months later. Well, implied in all of that was they had been telling him consistently, change what you're doing or else. Well, they could tell him, but if you don't do it, you know, nothing happens. It may be that was what your message was for.
Okay.
Can you stay in touch with Judith or somebody, and so we find out? I want to hear the end of the story here. If you get in touch with the guys and get a good message, I'm interested in hearing it.
All right. Thank you.
Okay.
My question is, 10 years ago, I started having pain, physical pain, hips and arms. And the doctors still to this day don't know what the problem is. I had 4 hip surgeries. Nothing's working. And so I started meditating and doing somatic practice to get into my body and get connected. I don't get answers to the question, why and what am I supposed to do with this? And so a month ago, I went into a hypnosis session, regression, between life, and dark. There's nothing. It's just dark. There's nothing, no answering, nothing. So I'm back to square zero.
Okay, all right. And your question is, what can you do?
It's like, why is it the answers are not being available to me? The only
Yes.
thing I'm able to understand is that I have to change my job. Like I'm a dance teacher, so physically I can no longer teach. And then whenever I'm looking for a job, I get this nausea. It's like my body doesn't want me to work, but I have to earn a living. I have to keep my house. So I don't know. I'm like, use words because I'm not getting the message.
Okay, so maybe try this. Maybe you're not asking the right questions. What if you asked the question, what avenues are open to me to make a living that don't involve dance, that I'm not thinking about? Just starting that way. Because it sounds just from your little description that your body is stopping you from dancing, and it's telling you, no, don't do this every time you try and do what seems to you to be the only thing open to you. So my suspicion is there's another or more than one path that's possible that you're not thinking about. One way to, now this doesn't come with a guarantee, but try it. If you'll sit down with a pen and paper and get in a nice receptive spot, you might try and what they say, blue sky. You know the expression blue skying something? It's you're free associating and putting down anything that comes to mind. No logic, no trying to make it work. Just you want to find out what's in the mind, okay? And maybe have your overall intent provide me with any clues that you can do, okay? So maybe you wind up and it says landscape, ice cream, French poodle. There's no telling what it might say. Don't try and judge it. Don't try and make sure that it's okay. Just take it down as much as you can. That's the perception part. Then, maybe later, then you go and say, okay, now what do I have here? Does it make any sense? What is all this? And see if anything then resonates. Then maybe do it again if nothing really comes.
Okay.
I'm hearing a couple of levels of things, and one is there are physical problems that do not want to resolve or possibly can't resolve, and it may have something to do with a past life, who knows, but you're here now. So even if it does, well, no, I won't say that you can't do anything about a past life, because you can, but really this is a little more, it seems like it's a little more here and now focused. It's more like, okay, Nicole, you have, thank you guys. Up until now, you have defined yourself as a dancer. From this moment, you are not going to be able to define yourself as a dancer. Now, you can define yourself as someone who was a dancer. Is there such a thing as choreographing? Is there such a thing as teaching people without having to do it? I have no idea. Is it maybe that you now move to a life that has nothing to do with music at all? But there's no reason to assume it's going to be a desert. In other words, oh, my productive life is over. Now I'm just having to put in the time till I die. But it's more like, okay, I'm willing to go to the next thing, but I need to know what it is. Help me to find where I should go. Something on that order. You see? Again, the better the question, the better the answer. If your question is too definite and too defined, you handicap its ability to bring you in new areas. Do you draw?
Not very well, but
No, I don't care about well. But if you draw, maybe do some drawings with. And I don't have any idea if this would work, but it just came to me, so maybe I'm being prompted. Draw, just free form, and without knowing what it is you're going to draw, and see. I was once on the phone with a friend of mine, and she had a lot of emotional problems. While we were talking, she was molding in, the little clay, not the clay you fire, but just ordinary stuff. And she took a picture of it later and showed me what she was molding while we were talking. And it was a picture of a woman huddled over like this, and just clearly in pain. Well, it was an exact representation of what she was describing, only she wasn't thinking in those terms because she was thinking in words. Her body was expressing in Gestalt. Okay, so maybe a picture would be a Gestalt that might help you. Might try it. I have no idea if this will work. Okay?
Yep, thank you.
Does that help at all, do you think?
Well, it gives me some kind of
A way to move. Yeah.
Because
okay.
The depression was one of the questions I asked was, is it something that happened in the past life? But the only image I got from above was to surround myself with prisms.
With
Put them everywhere.
prisms.
Like crystals.
Have you done it?
Yeah, but it's been cloudy since, so there's nothing happening. But
Well, the sun may show up again.
But it was like my energy was green. I became green. Yeah.
Green is feeling energy. That's good.
They said that whenever the prism shows me the green color, connect with it, and you won't feel as lonely.
Okay. Now, if you can do that, you can also visualize that green.
Yes.
Now, if you can get a picture, if you get a really good, vivid picture of green, that kind of green, and put it on your wall and just look at it, it's a very small thing from the actual thing to a visualization of it. You know, they've shown that the brain, I won't say can't tell the difference, but it can't tell much difference between reality and what it's watching. So if you're watching a movie, as far as the brain's concerned, the movie happened to you, which is pretty gruesome when you think about television. But anyway, so you might try that. Okay, there's your first thing. They said prisms, and you did it. Now you could go back to them and say, okay, I did that. Now what? You know, I don't mean in a confrontational way, but I'm willing to listen and see what is there more I can do. Again, if you would keep in touch with Judith or somebody, I'd be very interested to know if any of this does any good. Okay.
I think, James, do you want to add something to previously asked question?
Sure. As I was reflecting on what you said, it seems to me like sometimes I'm way too indirect. And so I would ask, is there something that your guys can tell me or tell my guys that would help me figure out what I need to do next?
Well, it came out again. I think did I say this to you? I at least thought it. Getting it 2 or 3 times. It's a question of expanding your heart chakra, basically. Love. Extending love every day. Maybe I didn't say that before. The guys once gave me an exercise on that. Somebody had asked me on the internet, how can you give us an exercise on spiritual development? And the first one they gave me was every day practice love. And they said you could, and it's sort of funny, but it's also true. They said start with a dog because a dog loves you, you know. Then go to a cat because a cat loves itself. It doesn't care about you. And then go to a rattlesnake because you're afraid of it. You see, in other words, put the barrier up a little bit as you go. But every day practice love. Well, you can't help do self-healing while you're doing that. And I don't know why I didn't think to say that earlier, but that came to me very strongly. And as far as I can hear, that's their first and their last word on it. That is all, well, I'll say all you need. I don't know, but there's a problem because when something comes forward like that and I'm there charging ahead, sometimes I have to say, was that just me or was I actually being prompted? And you'll have to decide because I can't decide. But that's what I got that's the key right there. Now, you could ask yourself if you have been crippling yourself systematically over time by not expressing love or by not increasing the amount of love, you know, that you offer. That's not for us to know, but it is a question for you to ask yourself. Okay?
Good, thank you.
Okay. Oksana, how are we? Where are we?
I would like to add something from my side because I think every single word you said, it was absolutely, you know, right, absolutely up to place. I might not use proper English here maybe, but it's really impressive because I also know when people talk not just words, but there is energy behind words, because that way your message is very profound. You know, you have this deep content, and when even you are talking about your stories, like Judith, I was experiencing you know, my parallel stories showing up, self-reflection going on, and recognizing, you know, myself in what you were saying about yourself. So I think that's when, you know, everything becomes connected. That's when I can rediscover or find more trust in my own healing abilities. And it's always great to hear someone like you, who has no doubt, you have very, you know, good established connection with your guys, to hear from someone like you saying everyone is a healer, and say when you're not using it, it's just, you know, you don't have enough belief or whatever is stopping you. I felt almost like, oh, why am I not using these abilities, you know, enough? You know, why it's so obvious, whatever you were saying, like to listen to myself, to communicate with my symptoms or problems, because this concept is not new to me. I studied a lot, you know, psychology and other things, and yes, there are many other, you know, people talking about established connection with your, you know, neglected aspect, issue, health problem, symptom. It's just something neglected, something in the shadow that needs to be brought up to light and needs to be resolved. And they're actually trying to help you, right? All these symptoms, all these issues, they're there to help you expand and grow and evolve. And I think in our programs we've been talking about this again and again, because the whole our work is related to that, how to make something which is unconscious conscious, and help people heal and evolve spiritually, of course, because I think this is our major lesson here on earth, you know, to learn certain lessons. Yes, we are packed in this body, in this 3D reality, but we need to move on and see more. And I personally totally with you, because I know that, like, the energy world, that's how I use, this is my language, how energetically illiterate modern people are, and all words that we used to know, because this is something very dear and to my heart and to my mind. This is something I ponder a lot. It's like all these questions like motivation, confidence, you know, happiness, or your mission in life, all these things, they suddenly take completely different meaning when you think of it from the point of energy. It's like, it's not what is written in psychology books, not at all. It's just too mental and dry. But they all get their volume, they're filled up with content when you add this energy ingredient. And people, like, about relationships, because I can visualize this energy into relations, whatever happens. Sometimes see, you know, why people are stuck, because I see energy and what's going on with it on that level. So I'm very thankful for you for, you know, doing whatever you are doing. And it was absolutely amazing talk today. And I'm really, really very happy I met someone like you. I think we all should meet more often and try to do more to change the world, really open up these other dimensions. It's like living on the ground floor and not looking upwards, you know. It's like you have the whole skyscraper and you're just sitting in the ground floor, not even knowing how to use the elevator, and, you know, start moving around a little bit, and it's just totally different perspective. I totally agree with you.
You know, Carl Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will rule your life and you will call it fate. And that is the truth. And I wanted to one more plug for Dion Fortune. One of the things she has one of her characters say in her novels is, psychology has it by the wrong end. And that's exactly what you were saying. They know a lot of the processes. They understand it backwards, and therefore they're not getting any, well, leaving Jungian psychology to the side. Jungian psychology knows what's what, but the rest of it is of a piece with a materialist civilization that we are watching die in front of our faces, and none too soon. But it's not too much fun. Thank you for letting me do all this. This has been very interesting. Never done a webinar before.
Thank you very much for being with us today, Frank. We've enjoyed every minute of course, as Oksana has said. And I would just encourage everybody to check out Frank's blog that is listed on the I Am Events page. And we'll go into the archives as well for a sort of perpetual link up. And also to check out Frank's books. I'm telling you, these books are they're more than profound. They're more than high perspectives. They're the kind of thing that you can read a paragraph answer from the guys upstairs and you'll mull over it for 6 months. I mean, this is some really deep and stimulating, very stimulating. And it's 3 novels, beginning with Babe in the Woods, and then The Messenger, and then Darkfire. You know, on the level of the Celestine Prophecy, and very few other writers who are writing things that are of direct interest to us in terms of consciousness development and the expansion of awareness.
Not on the sales level.
All of those books, just really terrific books. And we thank you so much, Frank, for taking your time to be with us here today. And if anyone has any questions, they can email either Oksana and me, and we'll forward to you and keep the conversation going. And who knows, maybe do webinar too, if you're willing to do that.
Son of webinar. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you all. Thank you all for being here. New visitors and old friends. We hope you'll all come back, and look forward to seeing you again.